Hey everybody, this is Stephanie again. I am following up on some of the work I did last year for Hurricane Maria, so I just wanted to give you some updates. This right now is the week of the 1-year anniversary of Hurricane Maria making landfall on Puerto Rico. I feel like it's important to not only remember this moment of tragedy for America, but also to provide some context and updates on the situation. I also hope to finish editing and post some of the videos I wasn't able to finish last year when we visited the island to film some local people and organizations who are actively working on recovery and aid. I'm going to kick off this video with a fundamental question that I'm left with 1 year after the hurricane demolished the island, and will basically make my argument for your consideration in 3 parts. So yes, this is a long video, guys. Hopefully you can stick it out. What I'm left to wonder is, was Hurricane Maria the perfect storm and the final nail in the coffin for Puerto Ricans to lose their rights to their property, land, and the right to truly self-govern as a commonwealth or state of the U.S.? Or will this be an opportunity for an auspicious future for Puerto Rico, where we can work to create a brighter future and maybe a renewed island that can lead by example with sustainable infrastructure and economic and political self-sufficiency? I finally took a deep look at where the island's recovery is. I needed to better understand what led up to the current dysfunctional state they are in and the continued historical unequal treatment of American citizens on the island. I sincerely believe that change is definitely coming, but some of it is good. Not all of it is in the best interest of the people of the island, but rather for those who will financially benefit from the situation. So I'm going to break this into a few topics to hopefully give you the background on why I'm left with these questions. But before I jump into this, let me tell you I'm not a political figure. I'm not an academic. I'm only half Puerto Rican, raised half of my childhood on the island, with a lot of family and friends still on the island. So that's my vested interest in caring about this. After this video, you may wonder what my political affiliation is, because you can't really talk about this situation without talking about the failure of government at all levels. So I'll just tell you up front what I am. I typically vote as a Democrat, but would absolutely vote for a candidate in any party based on their issues and competency. In Puerto Rican politics, I probably don't really have much of a true opinion since I don't live there currently. But when I choose to wax philosophically on where I am, I'm pretty torn right now. I grew up on the island thinking as a kid that I wanted it to be like all the other states. Now I actually really appreciate the intricate beauty of having a unique and vibrant culture that lives within the U.S. as a commonwealth, but technically is a separate and supposedly self-governing pueblo. Especially now that I have a deeper understanding of the governmental failures on all parts in the U.S. and on the island since the hurricane, I'm very torn. I can say that I'm not an independent, which has historically been a small political party on the island. However, I definitely understand why this political point of view is gaining serious traction, more than ever because of an awakening to the history of the island and the relationship with the U.S. and what has happened since the hurricane. I think the local government there has been broken for a long time, and in part with the colonialist history and political policies, it's led to a lot of the underlying issues that has made the perfect storm to rip off the metaphorical sheets of the island and uncover the realities that led to the current situation. Frankly now, based on the current congressional appointed non-Puerto Rican-led board called La Junta, or La Promesa, the Puerto Rican people and local government are truly left impotent and unable to make fiscal decisions on their own accord based on what they see fit as the best ways to improve the infrastructure and future of the island. I'll explain that a little later. So here are the 3 areas that I'm going to concentrate on for this video. First, it'll be a breakdown of where the island's post-Irma and post-Maria 1 year later. I'll give you my personal impressions since I was just there a few weeks ago and where the most challenging issues still remain. Second, I'll do my best to give a high-level context and overview of Puerto Rico and why the hurricane left the wake of devastation it did. I'm going to try my best. It's really hard to cover all of this in one video, and maybe I'll give some subsequent information on this. But again, I apologize up front for my potentially messy or insufficient summary because I'm not a historian, expert, or academic. But hopefully this will give you some understanding of the island. And third, I will provide a list of places where I think we could all consider spending time, energy, or resources to help in the continued efforts to rebuild Puerto Rico. Lastly, I'll provide links to pertinent information, articles that I used to help compile this, and point you to some of the experts or people that I respect and follow, whose opinions can provide more details and background on this whole situation. So here is where Puerto Rico is at since Hurricane Maria. This is some high-level statistics and information. So Hurricane Irma hit the island before Hurricane Maria, almost exactly a week before. It was on September 6th, and it mainly impacted San Juan. It just skirted the island, but it left some of that area already without power, already with flooding, and some issues that created more of a problem later. What really happened there that is important to note here on this video is that some of the other smaller islands that are around there, all of the Virgin Islands, for instance, and were completely devastated. Some of them were flattened. I can't imagine where they're at today because we don't get any coverage on that. We don't get any coverage on what's happening in some of the smaller islands that I don't know when they'll recover. At least Puerto Rico has the attention of the U.S. So Hurricane Maria made landfall on September 20th and spanned the entire island. This is pretty unique for a hurricane because it's a mountainous island and usually the hurricanes are stopped. It entered as a Category 4. It was almost a Category 5. I think the status wasn't Category 5 because it had been diminished by an island it hit right beforehand by 10 miles per hour. So it was one of the most powerful hurricanes to ever hit the island. And again, it spanned the entire island. Hurricane Maria caused the island about $140 billion in damage. The island has received about $20 to $25 billion in aid from the U.S. 2,975 people died. This is based on a George Washington University study. It's probably the most extensive study, and to note that it is based on the Federal Centers for Disease Control and Prevention guidelines for tallying the deaths that storms leave in their wake. So I'm going to give you my one personal view and political statement on this whole matter. On September 13th, only 7 days shy of the 1-year anniversary of this American tragedy, Trump denied the reality of this death toll on the island, which I absolutely find more than insulting, denigrating, embarrassing, and beneath the office that he holds. At first I found it laughable, audaciously ridiculous, but now I just find it personally assaulting and criminally disgusting. And that's just par for the course with this administration and nearly all of the responses to societal and human rights matters of importance. And I have to say that because it's so insulting. I don't even have better words to describe that. It hurts me to a core. In the immediate days, weeks, and months after the hurricane, communication was nearly non-existent due to the largest blackout in U.S. history and the second largest in the world on record. The majority of Puerto Ricans did not have access to food, water, diesel to run generators, or electricity for months under a paralyzing heat wave. This was much more than an inconvenience because the outage triggered a tremendous health crisis. Imagine your loved ones without the ability to run dialysis, breathing machines, medicine that may have needed to be refrigerated. And most critically, water pumps were shut off, which left many to drink from contaminated sources for weeks on end. Even when I went, almost 30 days into the tragedy, the majority still did not have clean, potable water. Sanitation networks failed, helping feed a leptospirosis outbreak. You guys can look into this, but it was an outbreak that had never been seen before. It's something that exists kind of all the time, but it's very rare. It happened because of dead animals that were in water sources, and if people were drinking from them, maybe like a spring with a dead rat, it created a deadly outbreak of this disease that killed a significant amount of people, and they didn't know how to communicate this to people because there was no communication at the time. So though it's only about 1% of the population today, Puerto Rico's own aqueduct states that it is still nearly 8,000 homes that are still without clean water a year later. More than 230 of these rural neighborhoods across Puerto Rico subsist on their own wells or natural springs, which some of them were significantly damaged after the hurricane or contaminated with bacteria. And just recently, the Washington Post and Kaiser Family Foundation came out with a study. It's a great article that I'll put in here, and you can read a lot of the details. But they did a great study where they looked back on it and interviewed, I think it was about 1,500 families. They said the wide-ranging impact of Maria on Puerto Rican families. So they asked them if they've experienced any of the following of these issues. And so 44% said they had a power outage of more than 3 months. 42% experienced negative income or employment effects. 26% said their home was destroyed or had major damage. 23% had a new or worsened health condition. 21% drank from a natural source. 21% say their vehicles were damaged. And 9% received mental health services. So that gives you some perspective, and this study was conducted between July 3rd to August 29th of this year. So a little personal anecdote too that I want to give you on this that I haven't told yet, and I've been waiting for the right opportunity to tell this story, but to me it's probably one of the most impactful stories that I had from last year. It actually was on the flight home after filming everything. I sat next to a gentleman who seemed honestly in shock. He was very quiet, and I struck up a conversation with him, and he asked me what I was doing, why I was there on the island, and where I was heading. I mean, everybody was kind of wondering what we were all doing on the airplane at that point. And I told him that I was there to film these stories of people who were actually doing aid, because I had a lot of people in the States that were wanting to donate. And he became very interested in me and what we were doing. And so then he told me his story and why he was on the plane. And he looked at me and he said, very calmly but sadly, and he said, what's in this cooler here on my lap is a really expensive medicine for my son. My son has a terminally ill condition. If he doesn't take this medication, it's from Pfizer. And it's one of these tiny vials has to be refrigerated, and it costs me $1,100 a month for a dose for a month. And I'm delivering it now to my wife, and who I sent my wife and my 2 kids to Pennsylvania. And he said, I was one of the lucky ones who was able to get my family off the island early because I was concerned for the safety and health of my son. Something that happened to me immediately after the hurricane was I had a generator, I was prepared, I had water, I had all the things that I needed, but the level of devastation was something that we just couldn't predict. He was on the south side of the island. On the second or third day, when he ran out of diesel, he had stocked up on as much diesel as he could. His generator didn't work anymore, so he couldn't refrigerate this medicine. So he went to a gas station, waited in line for 8 hours for diesel or ice. There was no diesel at that point, so it had actually been taken by the federal government to be able to provide to hospitals and different organizations that needed it as kind of like a immediate care. And at this gas station, their ice making machine died. They didn't have enough diesel to continue to run the generator that would possibly do it anyway. So when he got up to the front of the line, he couldn't get ice. He had waited 8 hours. He thought his son was going to die. Somehow, I'm not sure how, but he got a hold of his brother who was in the National Reserves way on the other side of the island. I don't know by what miracle, but this man made it down to him and got him a bag of ice. But as soon as the airport opened, which it took a while to open, he was able to get off the island, get his children off the island. But I think that is a really good example of how we don't think about the consequence of not having energy. It's not, we think, oh, you can live without it. And it's true, you can, most of us can. But there were people who didn't have dialysis. There were people on breathing machines. There are people like my cousin who is a quadriplegic who needed her chair to be charged. She lived in a building with an elevator. She didn't have somebody coming to her to take care of her during that time. My aunt, who is in her 70s, had to come and help my cousin. It just is piles on all these complications that we really don't think about. Another thing that happened to this gentleman was that he happened to be one of the few people at that time who knew somebody who had died of leptospirosis. So his daughter's best friend, unfortunately, contracted it, probably stepped in a puddle of water that was contaminated with rat urine or something like that. He showed me a picture of his daughter with this little girl who had only passed away about a week before I met him. So I just wanted to bring to you that this is the consequence of something like that. And I hadn't told that story because I wanted to wait for the right moment to explain that. So another major thing that's happening right now is PTSD. And it's expected to be peaking right about now, between 12 and 18 months after a trauma. Some estimates indicate that suicide rates increased from 20 to 30% since Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico. In the days immediately following Hurricane Maria, the island suicide prevention helpline received about 800 calls. Now, a year later, the helpline is still getting about 500 to 600 calls a day. Suicide prevention is critical, especially within the context of the children in Puerto Rico who watch their homes torn apart, their friends moving en masse to the mainland, feeling food insecure, living without water, power, service. Their parents have lost jobs left and right. The long-term consequence of losing their friends and family in Exodus can't be understated for the mental health in children. Before the storm, the island was already bankrupt and hemorrhaging its 3.3 million U.S. citizens. According to an article in CNN, a survey of more than 60,000 students conducted by the Puerto Rico Department of Education and the Medical University of South Carolina, public school students in Puerto Rico experienced high rates of depression symptoms and other problems in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria. Many students have experienced hardships that can lead to hopelessness or suicide. Last fall, 346,000 kids started public school there, and this year it's expected that there are about 39 to 40,000 fewer. In some of the 277 schools, 1 in 4 of them closed permanently. Some hardships that were experienced, we have 44.7% experienced their house was destroyed or damaged. 32.8% families struggled to find food or water, and 30.4% said they could have died or thought they could have died. And 12.2% saw fights or violence during that period after the hurricane. So right now I'm going to kind of read some information about the different pieces of recovery that the Miami Herald covered. It's really just kind of reading off an article that I found really interesting. I'll provide a link to that below. Federal recovery aid for homeowners, renters, and businesses has been slow. And out of the 1.1 million applications for individual aid, FEMA said that nearly a third, or 332,000, were denied. Why? Well, payouts are often insufficient to complete the needed repairs, especially when you're looking at a lot of these property owners maybe don't have insurance. Property title issues arising from Puerto Rico's system of often informal land transfer. It's a legacy system from the Spanish colonial legal system. I don't want to get into it, but it's true. A lot of Puerto Ricans maybe live within their grandfather's house, or they took a floor or something like that. And there wasn't like a formal transfer of title or ownership. And so that's one of the main reasons that FEMA was unable to provide funds to help fix destroyed homes. So it's disqualified thousands of households from receiving any federal emergency management aid to repair their damaged homes. The Puerto Rican government says about 60,000 occupied homes remain roofless, covered by the temporary blue FEMA tarps that have become a symbol of Maria's devastation, and what many on and off the island perceive as a woefully inadequate response by the administration of the President Donald Trump. And yeah, I think that is a really, really strong statement. It's true. When you fly over the island and you see tarps, still blue-covered tarps, and people without roofs, it just seems inhumane. An analysis of Miami Herald, Parent McClatchy of Public Data for FEMA's Housing Assistance Program found that as of June 1st, Maria survivors in Puerto Rico received an average of $1,800 for repair assistance. In contrast, survivors of Hurricane Harvey in Texas last year got about $9,127. So now I'm going to go over some of the historical context of why Some would say that this feels like another chapter in a long, complicated history of a colonialist relationship with the U.S. This is a perspective that not everyone has, but I think that more and more people are aware of how this makes people feel like a second-class citizen to the rest of Americans. And I think that the level of effort that we've seen people make in the governments to Puerto Rico is proving that this is, it makes you feel like a second-class citizen. There was the Spanish-American War, and Puerto Rico became part of the U.S. at that point. In 1898 to 1946, Anglo-Americans ran the Puerto Rican government. In 1946, the U.S. recognized that this was obviously colonialism and allowed the first Puerto Rican governor to be elected. His name was Luis Muñoz Marin. In 1952, after the United Nations was created, the U.S. was pretty much embarrassed to have that colony, so they created the Commonwealth Territory within the Puerto Rican government. Just to give you a little context, in the 50s, because of the sensitivity around this, it was actually viewed as illegal to even fly the Puerto Rican flag. So imagine not being able to fly the Michigan flag or the Nebraska flag or a Florida flag, because it was viewed as a symbol of independence at the time. Some people believe that maybe the reason that Puerto Ricans are now comfortable with being U.S. citizens is a little bit of time has passed, and eventually they adapted to that because there are a lot of benefits to being American, many that everybody reaps there. Certainly compared to a lot of other colonies in the world, this is probably the best situation for most people to be part of the U.S. But what it makes you feel is it's difficult to reconcile that it feels separate and not equal to other states, and this has just kind of been the constant struggle of the island. And there are varying degrees and different opinions about this, and that's a lot about the politics there. So Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens, in case you still don't know that. As a U.S. citizen, residents on the island cannot vote for president and have no voting representative in Congress. Puerto Ricans are automatically enjoy the full U.S. voting rights if they move to one of the states. Puerto Ricans on the island can vote in presidential primaries, but not in the general election. There is a Puerto Rican governor, and the political structure is just like here in the U.S., like as though it was a state. The two principal political parties on the island are the New Progressive Party, and they're in favor of statehood, and the Popular Democratic Party in favor of remaining a commonwealth, so the structure that they have right now. The third political party is an independent movement, but it has a historically underwhelming part of the population who vote for it. But as previously stated, there is a tremendous increase right now and interest in this party since the hurricane because of the awareness now and feeling like second-class citizens. Puerto Rico's non-voting representative in the U.S. House has recently introduced legislation, I believe in June, that would hopefully make it a territory in the States with full-fledging voting rights no later than January 2021. And that is due to a recent referendum. I don't know when the referendum was. There have been 5, I believe, in history, where it's essentially a petition to Congress to become a state. And just recently, within the last day or two, the governor of Puerto Rico has been pushing Trump to bring this to the table again. Something that is kind of a complicated piece of the economic structure of Puerto Rico and the difficulties of living on an island is that everything has to be imported, either by boat or plane. And if it comes in by a boat, there's something called the Jones Act, which was put into place like 100 years ago. And it basically says that anything that's imported into Puerto Rico must be on a U.S. flagship with a U.S. crew, which causes a tremendous increase in cost to import products. This was intended to be a regulation of shipping goods into the island, but what it has created is a really expensive situation to rebuild the island. It's difficult to bring in help during a crisis. Right after the hurricane, I don't know if you recall, but it was very temporarily put on pause so that some other countries nearby could bring even medical aid or help to the island. But it was very briefly suspended. And what it creates is what has always been a situation there where the cost of importing goods there is much higher than anywhere else. So even if, let's say we wanted to buy products from the Dominican Republic, it has to go to the U.S. first, mainland, be transported onto a U.S. flagship, and then come over here. So to build in Puerto Rico, obviously a lot of things have to be brought to the island. During the crisis where they were just trying to get power back online, they had to bring in a lot of machinery and different things too, and all of that had to go through this act. And let's talk a little bit about the debt that already existed. And it is a really complicated thing that I could not break down for you. You can read plenty on this, but I'm going to give you just the highest level. There was a significant debt leading up to what was, I think it was like $43 billion debt, happened in around 2006. There was, when the economic recession was peaking, a lot of bonds were issued by Wall Street. And now that there's a lot of uncovering behind this, trying to understand what led to this level of debt. The majority of the $43 billion was loaned, and most of it was loaned just to repay old debt. It's not even new to help with infrastructure. The banks in the U.S., knowing that there's no way to repay this, or capacity to repay this, continue to loan this money. And so it feels like it's just yet another way to suppress people there. They try to get the money back through a variety of ways, whether it's taxes on the people, like insanely high taxes. And I think there's more than one way to do that. They offer a lot of tax benefits to corporations to move to the island, but the people of the island are the ones that are continuing to pay for this debt. And it's really a dysfunction of the government, the local government, and managing the money inappropriately is my understanding of what is going on, but that's just a fact of the matter. And so now now what's happening is you're not seeing any money being loaned to the island to really help rebuild the island and do something better and improve the infrastructure. Instead, you're just seeing it continue to band-aid what already exists. Nobody is investing from the government to improve the situation, whether it's roads, it's power, it's water. So this will just fall apart again. That's what everybody knows is going to happen when another hurricane comes through. And probably like the final nail in the coffin here for me is that, and I've heard about this, but I really didn't know a ton about it till recently, and it's my own naivety, but this thing called La Promesa, or the La Junta. It's essentially the U.S. Congress exercised a policy that established a small appointed political board of non-Puerto Ricans to run the fiscal and economic stability of Puerto Rico, and it was due to this insane debt that they had back in 2006. So this political body is ran by people here in the U.S. and but Puerto Ricans pay for it. Essentially, no spending can be done without the approval of the board, and it is in constant battle with the local government because what the local government knows needs to happen is not what necessarily is getting approved by the board. So even though it feels like even if you wanted to vote locally for certain initiatives to move forward, whether really it's anything, it would be like essentially you're handicapping the local government and the local people from making decisions that could improve their livelihood. Instead, they're just continuing to bat around how are we going to get rid of this debt instead of wiping away the debt maybe, or considering giving them real solutions to paying down that debt. And also they're not holding, it doesn't seem like the right people are being held accountable for making poor decisions politically around this and creating this level of debt. So instead, it's the people who are suffering through this and will continue to suffer through this until some political figures can come to agreement in this. The positive part of that was that they were able to declare bankruptcy. That was the main reason that the promesa was created, which means promise. So yeah, it feels like the final block and it feeling like a real colony. No longer are they a sovereign territory of the U.S. that can self-rule. At this point, they really are cut off. So let's talk a little bit about what is happening too. This is very controversial, I would say, what I'm about to explain to you. But it is, and you're going to have people on the island who feel extreme thoughts on this, but it's something that we need to consider that could happen and has happened many times in history all around the world. But there is a big fear of land grabbing and looting of the island's natural resources. That is a huge concern right now. The island is very unique. It does have a ton of natural resources that could be of interest by a lot of people. So, for instance, there was $20 billion by the U.S. federal government that was transferred to Puerto Rico, but the consequence of this is that the island government decided that not only that the residents who live kind of in the coastal low-lying areas won't get any cash unless they relocate. Well, those areas are beautiful on the island. They are viewed as some of the areas that probably investors would want to come in, buy that land at very low cost and make, hotels, maybe dig the resources that are there. Some of them are in swampland. There could be oil. There could be all kinds of things and reasons to want to do that and sell it really cheap. Yet again, you're displacing people who had land of value, or maybe even subside in some cases on that, or subsist on that natural landscape right around there. They can eat fruit that's right there, so they're already impoverished, but at least they have some substance, some things that they can live off right there. So once they're moved out of those locations, who will take over that highly valued land? It's a real question that we have to ask. What's happening? And if you're going to be removed from there, are you really getting what you deserve out of that, or are you only getting a fraction of its value? Another thing that has existed for a long time in Puerto Rico is Act 20 and 22 of the tax code, which is kind of like the big secret that is not really a secret. A lot of businesses or individuals move from the mainland and just pay 4 cents corporate tax and 0 tax on passive income, shares, and dividends. So a lot of Americans who have figured that out want to move to Puerto Rico and take advantage of that. Right now, I'll give you a really good example of somebody that is a controversial thing that's happening down there. It's, if you have not heard of Brock Pierce, he is one of the founders of blockchain or cryptocurrencies, and he works with a bunch of other people, and they have started to take over Rincon, which is kind of the northwest part of the island. It's where a lot of the surfers and Americans live, or English-speaking Americans, and essentially they believe that they're bringing the idea of blockchain, which is really a technology that a lot of things can be built on. It's a ledger system that really has a lot of potential, probably. But they believe that it could break the paradigms that currently exist in areas like healthcare, energy, water. And again, I'll provide some links on this and you can look at it. But from a local perspective, there are some people who feel like this is yet another example of somebody coming from somewhere else telling me how to run my life and how to do things. And I don't know what it is you're looking for, but it clearly feels like you're here because you want these tax breaks, or you want, it's something that you're taking advantage of, this destitute situation that the island is in. Because there are a lot of people who feel like what we really should be investing in is agriculture, being self-sustaining, water systems that are improved water systems, green technology like solar panels and wind farming. There's a lot of ways that we don't necessarily need food to be coming in from the mainland when we have an island that produces plenty of food. So there's a lot of questions around that. What are they just really opportunists that are taking advantage of this disaster? So it's a fair question, especially when you look at some critical things. Like there is a documentary that I'm gonna put on here that shows a young student who is explaining that, yeah, so we're giving all these huge tax cuts to these outsiders, but we're tripling the fees for local students to go to the university, when the university has been tremendously hurt by this, because a lot of the students left the island and went to universities in the States. And the university's budget was cut by $269 million. So there's a lot of fair questions around that. So now I'm going to start getting all the questions of where do I donate, how do I help? And I really appreciate that you want to do that. And I will provide a list of some places that I think are still doing good work. Because some of the organizations that I initially looked at, I know they were there and they were doing stuff initially, but they aren't maybe necessarily running full force right now. But there are other organizations who are doing that. But just on a general high level, what are some areas that you might want to think about as you research and you look into where you want to invest your donation dollars, or how you want to help? One, go to the island. You can go there now. You can go, and I was just in San Juan only 3 weeks ago. I pretty much was there the entire time because I had an uncle pass away, unfortunately. But, the mainland areas, the main cities are running and operating mostly back to normal. It's more of the rural communities that I think are still in a lot of trouble, and the infrastructure of the whole island is in a lot of trouble. So you could go to the island, you could have your wedding there, you could do a lot of things, just go back and visit, that's important. Tourism is very important there. But other things that you could do is help us combat some of these bigger problems. So care about it in voting, your voting power, and who you are looking at, your local political people. Bring this stuff to their attention, hold them accountable for helping the island. But some broader things that you could look at, what about combating climate change and the effects of these hurricanes that we're seeing everywhere? This is a real thing that we have to be wondering, why are we seeing storms like this? Some specific local things, helping with local sustainable agricultural initiatives. There's a lot of emphasis being done on this space right now, and I can provide a list of that stuff. And I think it's a great idea because not everything needs to be imported when it comes to food. The island, once upon a time, was one of the main agricultural areas within the Caribbean. And for some reason, it isn't anymore. Updating and modernizing, not just continuing to band-aid the infrastructure and basic necessities such as water, cleaner renewable energy sources that are sustainable. And even when you look at infrastructure, personally, I think they could look at their overcrowded cities and the streets and public transportation. All of that could be improved, and if this is an opportunity to think about that. What if the island could lead in providing a way that could be done differently? I think that it's big thinking, but there are big thinkers all over the world. I would love to see them invest in the island. Creating local and sustainable economy with better jobs. Obviously, that's a problem everywhere. Organizations that are looking to rebuild schools, I think that's an important area, or put money into the children on the island. So whether it's schools or hospitals for children, I think that's something that you could look at specifically donating to, especially mental health, probably, for any children experiencing PTSD or their parents. All of the medical facilities and organizations, a lot of damage was done to these facilities. And though they operate with the same standards as here in the U.S., I think they could use some infrastructure improvements. A lot of them have gotten solar paneling, but I think there are a lot of the smaller ones in smaller towns and communities that still need assistance. And lastly, there were these great brigades that came together, which were groups of smaller community nonprofits who did excellent work at the time. And I think they have decided to come together and create a sustainable, or create a long-term brigade so that if anything like this happens again, that they can work and cooperate together. So it's almost like cooperatives that are of various organizations, whether it's, you know, feminist organizations that already had leads into areas of need, that really help deliver some of these resources to people who needed it most. Some of them, what I saw was that a lot of the resources that were being delivered, those were the people who really were taking it to the individuals who needed it the most, or had the access or understanding of how to do that. And so I would say continuing to support those small local organizations who can take that immediate action during a time of crisis is really important. And again, I'll provide some links to that kind of information for you. So this is my summary of what has happened in a year since Hurricane Maria. Hopefully this is helpful. Please feel free to comment to me, positive, negative, maybe something else you want to learn about, something else I might be able to point you to. I'm also going to be investing some time and energy into some other projects that are like this, that are just personal passions. And I hope to even bring other people who can speak instead of me trying to pull this all together by myself. It would be better to maybe rely on some of the experts who could just speak about this on their own. So anyway, thanks for your time. Hopefully you made it through this whole video and got something out of it. I appreciate it.